They let him have it for about 30 seconds. The laughter, I mean. 47 men in pressed black filled the marble lobby of the Ardent Group on Peachtree Street, every one of them certain he was the obvious answer to the job. Then the door turned and a different kind of man walked in, a faded olive jacket frayed at both cuffs. Boots resoled more than once, and behind him, holding the hem of that jacket in one small fist, a 7-year-old girl in a yellow dress, with a tin of crayons, clutched to her chest like the most important thing in Georgia. Somebody said the daycare was 3 blocks south. Isaiah Brooks did not turn his head. He set his daughter down on the cool stone, smoothed her hair once, and walked toward a 247-pound regional champion that the acting head of security had quietly hired to break him in front of everyone. 31 seconds later, the champion was face down on the mat and did not get up. Nobody laughed after that. Not even the woman watching from the doorway, the chief executive of the entire building, whose heart was moving faster than she was prepared to admit, because some part of her had just understood what the rest of the room had not. The man they had spent 30 seconds mocking was about to become the only thing standing between her and the loss of everything she had built. And the people coming to take it from her were already inside the building, on the payroll, smiling. Here is the part most people get wrong about a man like that, the part the whole room got wrong that morning. The loudest thing about him was never going to be the truest thing about him. Stay with me. This one earns it. That Monday had begun like any other in late August, the kind of Atlanta morning where the heat is already standing in the street at 8 a.m., like a man waiting to be paid. The Ardent Group occupied 39 floors of charcoal glass above Midtown, one of the most quiet, powerful security technology firms in the Southeast, the company that built the biometric vaults and access systems for half the defense contractors in the region. But the lobby that day had been turned into something else. 2 long rows of folding chairs, a registration desk. 47 men who had been told there was a single opening on the principal protective detail, the detail that shadowed the chief executive herself, and that the tryout would be held in person because the acting head of security did not trust paper. Former police, cage fighters, private military contractors who had spent a decade being paid to look like a wall. The lobby smelled of shoe polish and aftershave and ambition, which has a smell of its own if you have ever stood in a room full of it. And then the door turned and the smell changed. Grant Mercer crossed the marble before the desk clerk could lift her pen. He was 44, built thick through the chest, with the easy confidence of a man who has decided a contest is over before it starts. As acting head of security for the Ardent Group, Mercer had reasons to be nervous about this particular tryout. Reasons that had nothing to do with finding the best man for the job, and he had chosen to let that nervousness come out of his mouth as cruelty. He stopped a foot from Isaiah, close enough to make the height and the weight do the talking. "This is not a shelter," he said, "and we are not hiring fathers." The chairs laughed on cue. In the front row, a man with a shaved head and a championship ring, the size of a bottle cap, stretched one leg across the aisle and grinned. Brett Dolan, 247 pounds, 3 regional titles in the last 5 years, the obvious choice for the job and a man who knew it. He had been enjoying his morning. Isaiah looked at Mercer the way you look at weather, without heat. "My appointment is at 9, he said. "My name is on the list." Mercer checked the tablet and something passed across his face, a small tightening he covered fast, because the name Isaiah Brooks sat at the very top of the candidate roster, entered late on Sunday evening, entered personally, by Camille Adair, Chief Executive Officer of the Ardent Group. Mercer handed the tablet back without a word and tipped his chin toward the main hall. "Here is a thing I have learned about rooms like that one. The cruelty is never really about the man being mocked. It is about the men doing the mocking and what they are afraid of, and how much easier it is to laugh at a thing than to look closely at it. Keep that in your pocket. We are going to need it." A young receptionist named Rochelle Davies had been watching from behind the desk. She was 26, 3 months out of a temp contract, and 1 paycheck from her rent. And she watched the little girl stand alone in the middle of all that polished stone with the sketchbook clutched to her chest. And she made a decision she did not stop to weigh. She came out from behind the desk, She found a low table by the window where the morning light came in clean, pulled over a chair and crouched to the girl's level. "What are you drawing today?" she asked. The girl considered her with the grave attention of a 7-year-old deciding whether an adult could be trusted. "A house," she said. "With a tree. We're going to have one." Rochelle said that sounded like a fine plan, set her up at the table, and went back to her desk. Mercer saw it. He stopped on his way through and told Rochelle quietly that the lobby was not a daycare, and that if she wanted to keep her job, she would remember that. Remember her, remember the table by the window, both come back. Inside the main hall, the first round was not about strength. It was about judgment. Each candidate got 3 minutes at a standing desk with one interviewer, and a list of situational questions and no time to rehearse. The men ahead of Isaiah arrived with laminated credentials and printed service jackets and framed photographs of themselves standing next to people you would recognize. One man brought a binder. 2 of them opened with the same sentence, which was that they had been doing this for 15 years. Isaiah came to the desk with nothing in his hands. The interviewer looked up and asked for his file. Isaiah set down a single sheet of white paper. On it was a phone number and one line of text. "Call this if you need to verify anything." Mercer, against the wall with his arms folded, let a breath out through his nose, the sound a man makes when he has decided to be patient in a way he wants everyone to see. "You're serious," Mercer said. "Very," said Isaiah. The second part was a threat assessment screen. Each candidate watched 90 seconds of footage from a simulated event space, a crowded gala, actors drifting through frame, a principal in the foreground, and had 30 seconds to call the danger. Dolan watched, paused, and named 4 of the 6 marked positions, clean and loud, and the room gave him its quiet approval. Isaiah watched the loop once, his arms at his sides. 6 marked, he said. 2 unmarked. There's a camera blind behind the second column on the left that opens an approach lane of roughly 4 feet, and the man in the gray windbreaker has moved his right hand to his waistband 3 times since the clip started. He has not decided yet, but he is the one. The room went still for 2 full seconds. "Lucky," Mercer said. Isaiah said nothing and went back to his seat, where his daughter Naya had drifted in from the lobby, and was now drawing in the corner, tongue between her teeth, working a stub of green crayon down to nothing. 40 floors up, Camille Adair watched the feed on the monitor above her desk. She sat in a straight-backed chair with a legal pad on her knee that she had not written on in 20 minutes. Her chief of staff, a careful woman named Priya Sandoval, stood near the door. "He doesn't look like the others," Priya said. "No," Camille said, "he doesn't." 3 weeks before that morning, an unmarked envelope had arrived on Camille's desk. No postage, no return address, hand-delivered by a courier service that, when she called, had no record of the pickup. Inside were 11 pages, a service summary with most of it redacted in clean black bars, a skills assessment, a personal profile. A man named Isaiah Brooks, and at the bottom of the last page, a single typed line. "She is going to need him before the quarter is out." Camille had run the phone number printed beside it. She was still waiting on a name. When the bracket for the physical round went up on the board in the main hall, the room read it the way men read a thing they understand. Most pairings were sensible. One was not. Grant Mercer had set Isaiah Brooks against Brett Dolan. It was not an accident. Mercer had built the bracket himself that morning, and he had placed that pairing with the quiet satisfaction of a man solving a problem before it grows. If this quiet, unpedigreed single father who had appeared from nowhere at the top of the chief executive's personal list could be put on the floor in the first round, cleanly, in front of witnesses, then the whole inconvenient matter could be closed before lunch. Dolan read the bracket and smiled. Not a cruel smile. Dolan was not cruel by nature. He simply did not see it as a contest. The other candidates drifted to the edge of the mats. A few took out their phones. The mood in the room slid into something between sport and appetite. Upstairs, Priya leaned toward the monitor. "Camille," she said, "they've matched him against Dolan." Camille was already on her feet, straightening her jacket. "You're going down there," Priya said. "It is a small screen," Camille said, and walked out. She arrived at the door of the training floor with no announcement and no escort, and the moment she appeared, the air in the room reorganized itself around her. Spine straightened. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Mercer came toward her fast. "Miss Adair, there's really no need." "Continue," she said, looking past him at the mats. She did not look at Dolan. She had already read Dolan. He was exactly what he appeared to be, strong and experienced and entirely legible. A closed book with the title printed on the cover. She looked at Isaiah. He was crouched at the edge of the mat, retying the lace on his left boot, and he was not looking at Dolan, and he was not looking at the crowd, and he was not looking at her. In the years since Camille Adair had become the youngest chief executive in Ardent's history, she had sat across from hundreds of people working very hard to make an impression on her. Isaiah Brooks was the first in a long time who appeared not to know she was worth impressing, or to have decided that it did not matter. That single fact held her attention more than anything else she had seen all morning. If you had been standing in that doorway with her, what would you have noticed first? The size difference, probably. Most people did. They would not have noticed the thing that actually mattered, which was that the smaller man had already stopped paying attention to the larger one, because he had finished his calculation, and the calculation did not require Dolan's cooperation. Dolan rolled his neck, stepped onto the mat, and looked down with something close to generosity. "You want to give your spot, too, the next, Si," he said. "Save us both the trouble." A low wave of laughter. Isaiah finished his lace, stood and stepped onto the mat without a word. In the corner of the hall by the window, Nia had stopped drawing. She had climbed onto the chair to see over the heads of the men. The young receptionist had drifted to the doorway and stood near her without quite deciding to, the way you stand near a child who is about to watch something. "Is your daddy strong?" Rochelle asked her quietly. Nia held the sketchbook tighter. "He doesn't lose," she said, "but he never says it. He says that's bragging." The referee raised a hand. The timer started. Dolan came forward immediately. No hesitation, because hesitation was for men who were uncertain, and he had ended 3 matches already that morning in under 40 seconds each, all with the same sequence. Close the gap, take the grip, put his weight on you, and let gravity do the rest. He had no reason to think today would be different. He applied it now, and Isaiah moved back. Not scrambling. One precise step, his weight rolling to the outside edge of his left boot in a way that turned Dolan's line by maybe 6 degrees, almost nothing, except that it was the reason Dolan's grip closed on empty air instead of shoulder. The room did not understand what had just happened. Dolan reset and came again. By the 9th second, Camille had stopped breathing at her normal rhythm. She was watching the smaller man's eyes, and they were not tracking Dolan's hands and feet the way a fighter's eyes track. In reaction, chasing motion. They were still. He was reading something underneath the movement, some current below the surface of it. Dolan came a 3rd time and a 4th, and each time Isaiah gave him a fraction of an opening, a half step of apparent weakness, an invitation, and each time the follow-through arrived at a place where the opening had already closed. Camille's right hand found the doorframe without her deciding to put it there. At the 17th second, Isaiah's expression changed by a single degree. He had seen what he came to see. He had spent 16 seconds not fighting Brett Dolan. He had spent 16 seconds learning him. At the 18th second, he stepped in instead of back, and what followed went too fast for most of the room to track. One hand took Dolan's elbow at the joint, the other made a small, exact correction to the big man's center of gravity. And it was not a throw, not the way the cage teaches it, but a redirection so precise that Dolan's own momentum became the thing that put him down. 247 pounds, 3 regional belts, 3 straight finishes that morning, and he hit the mat face first and stayed there. 31 seconds, but no one spoke. Isaiah released the hold, stepped back, and stood, and his breathing had not changed. He turned his hands over once, a mechanical check, and walked off the mat. Grant Mercer was holding a clipboard. He did not seem to know it had slipped from his hand until it cracked against the floor. The phones that had come up to film a short and satisfying humiliations were still recording. Nobody had thought to stop them. Nia slid off her chair the instant the room went quiet, because quiet was not the sound she had expected, and crossed the floor to her father with the focused urgency of a child on a mission. "Daddy, are you done?" He crouched to her level and looked at her face with the careful attention he gave to everything that mattered. "All done," he said. "You want to find some peach lemonade." With ice, she said, as if negotiating. With ice, he said, and stood and took her hand and walked toward the exit, while behind him 2 candidates helped Brett Dolan to his feet, both of them arranging their faces into the expression of men who had expected this. Camille Adair stood at the door, and her hand came off the frame. She turned and walked back toward the elevator without a word, and Priyatha fell into step beside her. And for the whole length of the corridor, neither of them said anything. Then Priya said very quietly, his breathing didn't change. "I know," Camille said, and pressed the button. And somewhere between the ground floor and the 41st, she admitted to herself, as a purely operational observation and nothing more, that she had not watched a single other person in that room for the last several minutes. To understand why a man like that wears a dead woman's jacket to a job interview, you have to go back, and we are going to. 22 years, give or take. Long enough that the boy who lived it would not recognize himself. Isaiah Brooks grew up on the western edge of the city, in Vine City, in a shotgun house with a porch that listed to the left and a grandmother named Odessa who took in other people's laundry and other people's children when the situation called for it, which in that neighborhood it often did. His mother was gone early in a way the family did not discuss at the dinner table. His father was a name and a closed door. So it was Big Mama Odessa who raised him, who walked him 3 blocks every Sunday to a storefront sanctuary with folding chairs and a window unit that rattled like a freight train, and who told him the same thing on the same corner every week, in front of the same boarded-up store, holding his hand so he could not run ahead. She told him the Lord did not ask a man to be the loudest in the room. He asked him to do justice, and to love mercy, and to walk humble. She said it so many times it stopped being words and became the shape of how he stood. He was not a large boy. He learned early that the world will test a small, quiet boy to find out what he is made of, and he learned to let it, and to keep his hands down until the precise moment they were needed, and to make that moment count, and then to put his hands back down. A retired Marine who ran a boxing room out of a converted garage on Magnolia Street took one look at him at 13 and said the thing nobody had said out loud. "Son, you don't fight angry, you fight on time." That sentence followed him into the Navy. It followed him through the worst weeks of his life on a beach in California where more than 2/3 of his class quit, and he did not. Not because he was the strongest, he never was, but because Odessa had spent his whole childhood teaching him that the body gives up long before it has to, and that the difference between a man who finishes and a man who quits is almost never strength. He was a SEAL for 11 years. The details live behind the black bars on those 11 pages, and they will stay there, because the man who earned them never once said them out loud to impress a soul. And I am not going to start now on his behalf. 2 things matter for this story. The first is that he became very, very good at a narrow and specialized thing, which was reading a room full of people and knowing before anyone moved which one of them was the threat. The second is that somewhere in the middle of all of it, on a 48-hour pass in a city, far from any ocean, he met a woman named Renata at an art opening he had only gone to because a buddy's sister had a painting in it, and the buddy had begged. Renata Coleman taught art to children in Sweet Auburn, in a community center 2 doors down from the church where a king once preached. She was not impressed by him, which was the first interesting thing that had happened to him in months. She told him, on their second meeting, that he carried himself like a man waiting for a door to be kicked in, and that it looked exhausting, and that she had no intention of living in a house where someone was always waiting for the door. They married 11 months later in that same Sweet Auburn sanctuary, and for a while the door stayed shut, and the house was quiet in the good way. She gave him the jacket their first winter. She had found it at a thrift on Auburn Avenue, an old olive canvas field coat, worn soft, and she had taken it home and patched the elbows and mended the lining herself, because she did not believe in throwing a good thing away just because it was tired. And inside the collar, where only the man wearing it would ever see, she stitched a few small characters in red thread. The reference for a verse. Micah chapter 6, verse 8, justice, love mercy, walk humble. She did not explain it. She did not have to. He had been hearing those words his whole life in his grandmother's voice, and now they were sewn into the back of his neck. Nia came 2 years after that. And then, when Nia was 4 years old on a Tuesday in October, Renata stayed late at the center to finish hanging the children's show. The one where every kid got a frame on the wall no matter how good the drawing was. Because she said a child who sees their work framed grows up believing they are worth framing. She was walking to her car on Boulevard at dusk, when a man who had been drinking since noon ran the light at twice the speed and did not slow down. Isaiah was 1,100 miles away when the call came. He was on a transport home within 6 hours. He was out of the Navy within 60 days. He did not go back. Grief does not leave a man. People say time heals, and they are not entirely wrong. But that is not how it works, not at first. Grief moves in. It learns the house. It learns which stair creaks, and which side of the bed is empty, and what time the light comes through the kitchen window where she used to stand. And you do not evict it. You learn to live with a tenant who never pays rent and never leaves. And one day you notice you have not heard it in a few hours. And that is the whole victory. That is all healing ever is, a few hours at a time. He wore the jacket every day after. Not as a costume, as a promise he could put his arms into. Because the last full conversation they ever had, she made him promise 2 things. That he would not let the grief turn him into the man who waits for the door. And that he would build something that stayed after he was gone. Something with her name on it. Something for the children on Auburn Avenue who deserve to see their own work framed. So when a retired Navy Master Chief named Roy Whitaker, the man who had trained him and stood up at his wedding, and held him up at the funeral, called him in August and said, "Son, I need you to take a job. There is a woman in Atlanta about to be robbed of everything, and she does not know it yet, and you are the only man I would trust in that building." Isaiah listened. And when Whitaker said, "I sent her your file, no name attached, because if I sign it, she will spend a month vetting me she does not have." As Isaiah understood that the 11 pages on Camille Adair's desk had a sender after all, and that the sender was the closest thing to a father he had left. Hold those 2 promises in your mind. A foundation with her name on it, a door that stays open. Everything that is coming is the keeping of them. Now back to the present and to the cold floor of a glass building, because mocking a man at a tryout is not the crime. The crime is the system that does the mocking on everyone's behalf every single day and calls it standards. Camille called him up before the bracket had even finished. The other 46 were still in the main hall when Priya appeared in the doorway and asked Isaiah Brooks to follow her, and a few of them traded looks, and Mercer opened his mouth. But Priya had already turned toward the elevator, and Isaiah was already following with Nia beside him, sketchbook under her arm, and none of it had been submitted to anyone for approval. The 41st floor was quiet, the way extensive buildings are quiet, not silent but deliberately undisturbed. Camille's office took the northeast corner, floor-to-soiling glass that gave the city back in clean gray rectangles. Books arranged by the color of their spines, a desk with exactly 3 things on it, a monitor, a legal pad, and a glass of water. Nothing personal, nothing alive. Nia walked in, stopped, and surveyed the room with the frank seriousness of a child taking a place's measure. "It's clean in here," she announced, "but there's nothing green. No plants, no nothing." Camille, who had been watching the father, looked at the daughter. A beat passed, longer than it needed to. "I know," she said. Then she looked back at Isaiah, and the subject of plants was closed, though something about it stayed in the corner of the room and did not entirely leave. She slid a folder across the desk and told him to sit. He sat. Nia settled into the chair beside him, opened her sketchbook on her knees, and started to draw without being asked. Camille asked about the technique on the mat. He said it came from specific training in specific places, and did not elaborate. She asked about the redacted service record. He said it was in the folder she had already read. She asked who had sent her 11 pages with his name on them. He looked at the folder for 2 full seconds, and something moved behind his eyes, a recognition, a calculation, and then a deliberate settling. "I have an idea," he said, "but I would rather earn the job than trade on a name." That was not quite a no. She let it stand. "What salary are you asking?" she said. He gave her a number, and it was not suspiciously low, and it was not inflated. It was the number of a man who had thought about what the work was worth rather than what the market would bear. She signed the contract without negotiating a dollar. Downstairs, Grant Mercer read the personnel notification on his phone. He stood in the corridor outside the main hall and looked at the screen for a long moment, and then he dialed a number that did not appear anywhere in the Ardent directory. The call lasted 51 seconds. When it was done, he put the phone in his pocket, smoothed the front of his jacket, and went back inside to finish the rest of the tryout, as though nothing in his morning had changed. The first week, Isaiah worked like a shadow with a job. He stayed exactly 1/2 step behind Camille and to her right, not beside her, not 2 steps back, 1/2 step, the position from which a man can see her hands and the room at the same time. She noticed it on the second day and said nothing, because there was nothing to say. It was correct. He knew which doors were on a delayed closer before he reached them. He read meeting rooms before she walked into them, not in any way anyone could point to. Just a half-second pause at the threshold, his eyes crossing the space once and settling. He knew when a person in a room was carrying tension before the conversation revealed it. In 7 years of running the company, she had never had a detail she forgot was there, because he simply functioned the way a load-bearing wall functions, invisibly and completely. And she noticed, after a few days, that he did not look at her the way people usually looked at her, with that faint overage a person gives off when they are aware of standing near power. He was not oriented toward her because she was important. He was oriented toward her because she was his responsibility. It took her 3 days to find words for the difference, and when she did not like how much it moved her. Midweek, the after-school program called at noon. Nia's regular sitter had a family emergency and could not take her. Isaiah came to the office door and spoke quietly to Priya, framing it as a logistical complication that would require his absence for the afternoon. Camille heard the edges of it and said, "Bring her here." Priya paused. Camille had already turned back to her screen. Nia arrived 40 minutes later with her backpack and her tin of crayons, said a grave hello to Camille, set up at the low table in the waiting area, and worked without interruption for the entire afternoon. At 4:30, she walked to the open door of Camille's office and held out a folded sheet of paper. Camille opened it. 3 figures stood in front of a house. One tall figure in dark lines that were clearly meant to be a jacket. One figure with long hair in a gray dress, which gave Camille a strange and specific feeling she did not examine. One small figure between them, and in front of the house, a tree, broad and green, with round shapes in its branches that might have been fruit, or might have been ornaments, or might have been something a 7-year-old simply believed a good tree should have. The sky was yellow. Camille looked at it for a long time. She folded it once, opened the top left drawer of her desk, and laid it inside, and she did not put it in the recycling bin under the desk, where paper without a function went. That evening, she received an email from an address that resolved to nothing. The message was 9 words. "You are being sold, and you do not see it." Attached was a screenshot of a single clause from a contract she had signed 6 months earlier. The merger framework with Caldwell Equity Partners, the firm run by a silver-haired financier named Preston Vaughn. The clause carried a small marker at the foot of the page, Schedule 4B. She called her general counsel. He did not pick up. His assistant called back 40 minutes later, with an explanation that felt assembled rather than remembered. Camille sat at her desk and looked at the framed mission statement on the far wall without reading it. Isaiah was standing at the window. He had been there since the call ended. "Do you know anything about this?" she said. "Not enough yet," he said. "But I am looking now. This is the part of the story where the trap closes its first inch, and the woman inside it cannot feel the metal yet. Have you ever signed your name to something a smiling man slid across a table, trusting the smile because the alternative was too much work? Most of us have. That is exactly how it is designed to work." The dinner with Preston Vaughn was set for the following Thursday, on the 40th floor of the Celine Hotel, the kind of room engineered to make powerful people feel comfortable being watched. Vaughn was 63 and wore the polished benevolence of a man who had learned that appearing harmless is more effective than appearing strong. He stood when Camille arrived, expressed a pleasure that sounded almost real, and ordered a bottle from a list that cost more than most people's rent. He acknowledged Isaiah with one brief, accurate look, the look of a man completing an assessment and filing the result. The meal moved through its early courses with the smooth performance of two skilled people who had agreed to enjoy the theater. Vaughn spoke of synergy and family without flinching. He named 3 of Camille's own initiatives to show he had done the reading. And then, over the entree, he said the words as if they weighed nothing at all. The third quarter covenant review, of course, will be the natural moment for alignment, given Schedule 4B. Camille set down her fork with the careful motion of a woman who does not let her hands say what her face will not. Inside her chest, something dropped and kept dropping. Of course, she said. Vaughn smiled with the warmth of a man who believes he has already won. I want to be clear, Camille. I am not your adversary. I am simply pragmatic. She looked at him. I appreciate the clarity, Preston. In the car, the city went by in streaks of white and amber. Isaiah drove. Neither of them spoke for the first 20 minutes. Then Camille said, "Did you read the contract before you took this job?" "First morning," he said. "Schedule 4B, Schedule 7, and the appendix." A pause. She watched his eyes in the mirror. "Why would you read my contracts? Because I cannot protect you if I do not understand the ground you are standing on," he said. She watched him. He was watching the road, and there was a line of tension in his jaw that had not been at the dinner table, which meant he had been performing calm in that restaurant exactly the way she had. And she had not noticed until now. That landed somewhere under her ribs and stayed. The next morning, Isaiah came in early, before the building filled, and walked the floors. He had been a guest in this building for 1 week, and he already moved through it, like the man who had drawn the blueprints. And it was on the basement level, in the parking structure, that he found the first real thread, because he found a gap. The security log for Sublevel 2 showed a window of 9 minutes and 40 seconds with no footage, not corrupted. Not an error with a code attached. Just absent, cleanly absent, in a way that was technically impossible under the current system, unless someone who understood that system very well had reached in and removed it. Isaiah did not report it. He made a copy, closed the original, and sat for a long time in the second-floor security office looking at that 9-minute hole. He had spent the back half of his career learning what the early architecture of a betrayal looks like, the kind of threat that comes not from outside a trusted structure, but from a load-bearing beam inside it that has quietly been cut. He was looking at one now. Grant Mercer had administrator access to the camera system. Grant Mercer had a number in his phone that did not belong to the company. And Grant Mercer had been in the building during those 9 minutes and 40 seconds. Isaiah closed the laptop and began quietly to build a different kind of record. About a week into the work, on a Thursday, Nia spiked a fever in the late afternoon, the kind that arrives with no warning and turns a bright child into a small hot stone. Isaiah came to Camille's door at 6 and asked, with the economy of words that defined him, whether he could leave at 7 instead of 8. Camille stood and got her coat. He looked at her. "You don't have to." "I know," she said. His apartment was on the 14th floor of a brick building, 12 blocks north, clean and small and almost entirely functional, except for one corner of the living room that belonged completely to Nia. Drawings covered the wall in a dense overlapping gallery, taped edge to edge, 3 years of them. Books stacked in bright columns by height. A basket of stuffed animals arranged in some private order. Camille sat on the edge of Nia's bed while Isaiah made soup in the kitchen, and Nia looked up from the pillow with the level calm of a 7-year-old, evaluating whether a visitor would say something worth hearing. "Do you have a mom?" Nia asked. "I do," Camille said. "Is she far away? We don't talk much." Nia weighed this with the seriousness of a judge reviewing evidence. "My dad is busy too," she said. "But he's always here." Later, after the soup and the rinsed bowls and the child is asleep, they sat at the kitchen table with 2 cups of tea, and the building made its evening sounds, and the city pressed its light against the glass. Camille asked about Nia's mother. Isaiah was quiet long enough that she wondered if she had crossed a line. Then he turned the cup once in his hands and told her. Her name was Renata. She taught art to children on Auburn Avenue, a drunk driver 3 years ago, while she was walking to her car after hanging a children's show. He told it the way he told everything, directly, without ornament, without asking for a particular response. Camille did not reach for the standard arrangement of sympathy words. She sat with it. Is that why you always stay exactly one half step back? He looked at her, and for the first time since she had known him, the expression on his face was not the expressions of a man doing a job. It was older than that, and less defended. He did not answer, but he did not look away. In the morning, she called an investigator she retained privately, separate from the company's counsel, someone no one at Ardent knew existed, and gave her the phone number from Isaiah's single sheet of white paper. The answer came back within hours. The number belonged to a retired Master Chief named Roy Whitaker, who had run Isaiah's unit for the last years of his service. Whitaker had sent the 11 pages. Whitaker knew about Vaughn. Whitaker had known longer than she had. Camille read the name and sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling, and then she said to the empty office the only sentence that felt accurate. I have been surrounded the whole time, and I did not see a single one of them. Now we come to the reckoning, and I want you to understand something before we do. In the stories people tell about justice, the hero arrives, and the bad man is simply punished, as if punishment were a force of nature, like rain. That is not how it works in the real world, and it is not how it works here. In the real world, the wicked are not undone by the hero's strength. They are undone by their own arrogance, by the paper they leave behind, by the assumption that no one is ever going to read it. Watch how this man does it. He does not raise his voice one time. Because the email had said sold and not borrowed, Isaiah and Camille's private forensic accountant, a soft-spoken man named Desmond Okafor, who had once unwound a hedge fund for the government, started not with the security logs but with the numbers. And the numbers told a story. Schedule 4B was a control transfer trigger. It said that if the Ardent Group breached a financial covenant in the third quarter, specifically if a particular debt ratio crossed a particular line, then operational control would transfer to Caldwell Equity, pending a shareholder vote that Vaughn, with the block he had quietly assembled, was confident he would win. The trouble was that the Ardent Group had not breached the covenant. Not actually, not on real numbers, so someone had been busy making the numbers breach it. Desmond found it in 3 nights, working in a borrowed conference room with the door locked. A string of transactions running through a distributor called Pelmarsh Holdings, a shell with 1 employee and a mailbox in Delaware, used to load the third quarter books with fabricated liabilities and channel-stuffed revenue that would reverse in exactly the wrong week, engineering a covenant breach of $4.2 million where no breach existed. The fabricated entries were precise to the cent, which is the kind of detail liars include because they believe precision reads as truth. One of them, the one that would later matter most, was a phantom service invoice in the amount of $11,940.62. And every single one of those entries had been approved through an internal account that required 2 signatures. One belonged to Caldwell's installed financial liaison. The other, it turned out, belonged to Grant Mercer, who had been handed a finance credential he had no operational reason to hold by a board member sympathetic to Vaughn, 8 months before any of this began. There it was, the whole shape of it. Mercer was not only the man who cut the camera and rigged the tryout. Mercer was the second signature. The mole had left his own name in the ledger. And here is the thing about a man like Vaughn, the thing that would bring him down. He had built a plan that required control of the company before anyone could examine the books closely. But Isaiah, watching the building the way he had been trained to watch a building, saw something in the 48 hours before the third quarter board session that did not match a routine review. 2 of the service elevators accessed after hours on maintenance badges that had never been checked out. 3 external visitors registered under a consulting name that appeared in no vendor file. And on the Monday evening before the Tuesday session, the motion sensors on the 38th floor, the floor that held the central server vault, logged a 6-second anomaly in the east corridor. 6 seconds in which they detected a presence and then stopped detecting it, which meant the sensors had been overridden rather than fooled. Isaiah built the picture on the security office screen piece by piece, and the picture that came together was this. The Covenant coup needed every decision-maker in the company in one room at one time, focused on one problem, facing one direction. That was not only the moment Vaughn took control. It was the moment the building went blind. and the ardent vault on the 38th floor held the biometric access architecture and the client records for 900 defense and corporate accounts, a thing worth more, on the open market, than the whole company wrapped around it. Whether Vaughn won the vote or lost it, that vault was a prize Caldwell could not afford to leave behind. The maneuver downstairs was the cover. The real theft was upstairs, and Isaiah had 40 minutes. The third quarter board session convened on a Tuesday at 4 in the afternoon in the glass boardroom on the 41st floor. 31 shareholders and board members. Preston Vaughn at the far end relaxed, a leather folio in front of him he did not need to open. Camille at the head. She had been ready for 9 days, though no one in that room knew it. She let Vaughn begin. He spoke in the patient, regretful tone of a man delivering difficult news he takes no pleasure in. He walked them gently toward the third quarter covenant. He invoked Schedule 4B as if it were weather, a thing that had simply happened to them all. And then, 60 seconds into his performance, Camille's earpiece carried 2 words from Priya, who was 2 floors above with a forensic team and an open line to the Atlanta field office of the FBI. They're moving. 2 floors up, on the 38th, they were already in the corridor. 4 of them, professional and unhurried, moving toward the vault door with the relaxed confidence of people who had been told the floor would be empty. It was not empty. What happened next was not a long fight. Long fights happen when there is doubt about the outcome, and Isaiah had spent his whole adult life learning to remove doubt as fast as possible. He took the first 2 before the third had finished understanding that the floor was not clear. The third came at him from the left, the angle he had already accounted for, the moment he read their formation on the camera the night before. The fourth was the largest and the most dangerous, and he lasted the longest. He lasted 11 seconds, and then Grant Mercer stepped out of the east stairwell with a pistol in his hand, and the flat, rehearsed expression of a man arriving at the part of the plan he had practiced in his head. "I need 15 minutes, Mercer said. "Stand down and nobody gets hurt." Isaiah looked at him. His left shoulder had taken a hard contact in the last exchange, nothing structural, but it registered, and he filed it and moved on. "I don't have 15 minutes, he said. The confrontation was brief. Mercer was trained and committed, but he was operating on the logic of a threat, and Isaiah was operating on the logic of a necessity, and necessity has an advantage in close quarters that confidence can never match. When the building security team and 2 federal agents came up the stairs 90 seconds later, Grant Mercer was seated against the wall with his hands secured, and an expression that held beneath its surface the specific shame of a man who had bet on the wrong outcome. Downstairs, Camille received the all-clear in her earpiece. She absorbed it, processed it, and returned her face to its baseline. Vaughn was mid-sentence. She let him finish. Then she said, "This session will need to be postponed." Vaughn's smile did not move, but something behind it did. "On what grounds?" he said, still pleasant. "On the grounds," she said, "that the third quarter covenant breach you intend to invoke does not exist. The covenant was breached on fabricated entries routed through a Delaware shell called Pellmarsh Holdings. I have the full reconciliation. I have an independent audit, commissioned 9 days ago, completed this morning, by a firm Caldwell does not control. And I have, as of 9 o'clock this morning, a whistleblower submission filed with the Securities and Exchange Commission, with the supporting documents attached, under the program that does not require my permission to proceed once it has been received." She let one beat pass, and then she looked at Vaughn the way you look at a man when you have finished being diplomatic. "Schedule 4B will also be contested under the fraud provision in Schedule 9, which voids any control transfer procured through documented partner misconduct. The clause you built your whole quiet little coup around dissolves the moment the breach is shown to be manufactured. And it has been shown." Vaughn sat very still. "I have been building the file," she said, "for 9 days. 2 federal agents entered the boardroom from the corridor. The room, which had spent the last 20 minutes being slowly herded toward one conclusion, turned all at once to watch a different one arrive. You see how that works. No magic, no lucky break. A man read the building and a woman read the books, and the wicked were undone by the precise records they had been too arrogant to imagine anyone would ever read. The second signature in the ledger. The 9-minute hole in the footage. The phantom invoice, $11,940.62, a number a liar chose because precision feels like truth. Every nail in the coffin had been hammered in by the men now sitting in the back of a federal car. The hospital was not where Isaiah had planned to end his Tuesday. He waved off the first paramedic with the same energy he gave to most things he did not need. Camille met him in the lobby as the police were finishing with the scene, looked at his left shoulder and the state of his shirt, and said, "I'm driving." He started to say something. She held up her keys. At the emergency intake, she gave his name and insurance from memory, a fact she did not mention, because she had read every personnel file the weekend after she hired him. The intake nurse looked at her, then at him, then back at her, with the diplomatic blankness of a professional declining to assume anything. In the exam room, while they waited for the attending, Camille took gauze from the supply shelf and began to work on a cut along his forearm, without asking, which he found notable. "You know how to do this," he said. "No," she said, "but I learned fast." He watched her work and did not say anything else. Nia arrived 35 minutes later with Priya, who had called the sitter, and then simply driven over when the sitter did not answer. The girl came through the door with the sketchbook under one arm and crossed the distance between the door and the bed in about 4 steps, and Cross took her father's hand without a word, which told Isaiah more about the drive over than any sentence would have. Then she turned and looked at Camille with the careful assessment she gave to questions that mattered. "Is Miss Adair the reason Daddy got hurt?" she asked. "No," Isaiah said. "Daddy got hurt because of what the job needed him to do." Nia considered this and found the reasoning acceptable. She turned back to Camille, and whatever she found in the woman's face seemed to satisfy some second question she had not spoken. "Can you stay?" Nia asked. "I don't want Daddy to be alone when he's hurt." Camille looked at Isaiah. He was studying the paint on the wall above the bed with great attention. She pulled the chair beside the bed closer to the wall and sat down. "Okay," she said. By 11 that night, the corridor had gone quiet. Nia was asleep on the waiting bench against the opposite wall, her head on Camille's folded coat, the sketchbook tucked under her chin. Camille sat without moving, her hand resting lightly near the girl's shoulder. Isaiah stood in the doorway of the exam room, cleared for discharge, not yet gone, his shoulder properly dressed, wearing a clean shirt Priya had retrieved from the apartment along with Nia's thing. He stood there and looked at the two of them in the yellow corridor light, and did not speak for a long time. Camille looked up. Neither of them said anything. The city ran its ordinary frequencies outside the window at the end of the hall, distant sirens, the low chord of traffic, the indifferent noise of a place that does not slow down for anyone's emergency. After a while, Camille said quietly. She drew on it again. He waited. "The one with the house and the tree," Camille said. "I had it on my desk. She came in this morning before I got there, and she added something." "What did she add?" he said. "More fruit on the tree," Camille said, "and a fourth person, standing a little apart from the other 3. Isaiah was quiet. The corridor light hummed its even hum, and for the first time in that long and breaking day, for the first time in considerably longer than that, the corner of Isaiah Brooks's mouth moved. It was small, it was quiet, it was, without any question, a beginning. Here is what they built, because the keeping of a promise is the part of the story that the cynics always want you to skip, and we are not going to skip it. Preston Vaughn was indicted on 11 counts, including securities fraud and conspiracy, and the submission to the Securities and Exchange Commission, once filed, moved entirely beyond his ability to charm or delay, because that is the design of it. Caldwell Equity's installed liaison cooperated within a week, the way the second man through a collapsing door always does. Grant Mercer was charged with conspiracy and the attempted theft of protected data from 900 federal adjacent accounts, and the finance credential he had been so pleased to be handed became the thing that hanged him, because his name was on both signatures, in his own hand, in the ledger. Schedule 4B, void for fraud, dissolved like sugar in hot water, and the Ardent Group remained intact, hers. And then Camille Adair did 3 things that no chief executive was required to do. The first, she funded with her own money and not the company's a foundation, and she let the man who had earned it choose the name, and he chose Renata's. The Renata Brooks Foundation for the Children of Auburn Avenue. art supplies and after-school studios, and a standing rule that every child's work gets framed and hung no matter how good the drawing is, because a child who sees their work framed grows up believing they are worth framing. The foundation needed a mark. Camille hired a design firm, and the firm came back with 3 clean, expensive, forgettable options. And she looked at all 3. And then she opened the top left drawer of her desk and took out a folded sheet of paper and laid it on the table. A house. A tree broad and green, heavy with round fruit. Use this, she said. Don't fix it. Don't clean it up. Use it exactly as the child drew it. So the tree that a 7-year-old had drawn, because she believed a good tree should be generous, became the mark of a foundation that would, over the next 10 years, frame the work of 4,000 children in Sweet Auburn. 2 doors down from the church where a king once preached, 2 doors down from the room where their mother used to teach. The second, she promoted Rochelle Davies, not to a slightly better desk. She made her the director of community programs for the foundation, with a salary that meant she would never again be 1 paycheck from her rent. Because the young woman who had pulled a table into the morning light for a stranger's child, who had been threatened with her job for the crime of being kind, had shown the company something about itself that the company badly needed to learn. The least powerful person in that lobby had been the only one who behaved like a human being, and Camille had decided that this was information, and that you reward the kind of information you most need more of. The third, and this is the one I want you to sit with for a second. There was a wall in the Ardent lobby, behind the registration desk, the first thing anyone saw walking in off Peachtree Street. It had held a large piece of corporate art, brushed steel and gray glass, the kind of expensive thing designed to tell you that the people inside this building were serious, and that you, the visitor, were small. It was the wall Isaiah Brooks had walked past while 47 men laughed at his thrift store jacket and his daughter's crayon tin. Camille had it taken down, and in its place she hung a single image, 12 feet tall, printed edge to edge across the whole wall. A house, a tree, 4 figures in front of it now, one standing just slightly apart from the other 3. And underneath it, in small letters, a verse and nothing else. Micah, chapter 6, verse 8. So that every candidate, every client, every silver-haired man in a $1,000 suit who walked into that lobby to do business walked first past a child's drawing of a tree and a verse about doing justice and loving Circe and walking humble. The men who had laughed in that lobby would never know that the whole room had reorganized itself around the thing they mocked. But it had, and the hiring, the tryout that Grant Mercer had rigged, became the last of its kind. Camille rebuilt the whole process around a thing Isaiah had said to her once in the car, almost in passing, that you cannot read a person's worth off the surface of them, that the surface is the one thing a person can fake and the last thing you should trust. Blind skills assessment, performance before pedigree. No more rooms where the obvious answer wins because he looks like the obvious answer. The policy had a name inside the company. They called it the Brooks Standard, though the man it was named for never once used the term and visibly disliked it when other people did. Isaiah stayed. Not because she made him head of security, though she did. He stayed because of a girl who had drawn a 4th figure into a picture, standing a little apart, and because the door of that house, in every single version Taya ever drew, was open. So, we have come to the end, and I am going to step out from behind the curtain for a moment, the way I have been doing all along, because I promised you at the start that I would, and because a story like this one is owed an honest accounting and not just a happy ending. I keep coming back to the lobby, to the laughter, 47 men in pressed black, and not one of them wrong about what they saw exactly. They saw a tired jacket and worn boots, and a man who did not fit the room. They were not lying. They were just looking at the only part of him that was easy to see and calling that the whole of him, which is the cheapest mistake there is and also the most common. And if I am honest, the one I have made more times than I would like to count. Because here is what the story is really about, underneath the takedown and the ledgers and the federal cars. It is about how loud the surface of a person is and how quiet the truth of them tends to be. The truth of Isaiah Brooks was sewn into the back of his collar in red thread where nobody could see it, and it had been put there by a woman who was already gone. And it said, do justice, love mercy, walk humble. And he had been doing all three in a building full of people who could not see any of it, because they were too busy laughing. 3 things: do justice, love mercy, walk humble. The man had been doing them quietly his whole life, in his grandmother's voice, and the world looked at his jacket and saw someone who had wandered into the wrong building. And the girl. Do not forget the girl. The drawing she could not stop making, the house with the open door and the tree that kept growing more fruit, was not a picture of something she had. It was a picture of something she believed in, drawn over and over by a child who had lost her mother at 4 and chosen, somehow, to keep drawing a home with a generous tree and a door that stayed open. There is a kind of faith in a thing like that, the kind a man could build a foundation on, the kind a man could build a whole life on, if he was brave enough and slow enough and kept his promise. So let me ask you something, and I want you to actually answer it, to yourself, before you do anything else. Have you ever stood in a room and watched something unfair happen, and felt the words rise in your throat, and then looked down at your shoes and said nothing, because speaking up was going to cost you something, and silence was free? Most of us have. I have. The young woman at the desk in this story did not, and it cost her, right up until the moment it became the best thing she ever did. That is usually how it goes. The cost comes first. The reward, if it comes at all, comes later, and quietly, and to the kind of person who was never doing it for the reward. If this story moved something in you, do me one small thing. Tell me down in the comments about a time you were the one who pulled the table into the light for a stranger, or a time you wish you had. And tell me which figure in that child's drawing you would be, standing in front of the house with the open door. Then like this video, so it reaches the next person who needs to hear that the loudest thing about a man is almost never the truest thing about him. And subscribe, because next week there's another one. Another quiet person the room got wrong, and you are going to want to be there when the room finds out. Do justice, love mercy, walk humble, and keep your door open. I will see you in the next one.